despite spoiling my talk a bit, they nevertheless provided some consistent and interesting background, and they allowed me to cut it probably to a decent time. So I have to confess to not having quite followed what I promised in the abstract, because in sort of preparing my talk and getting a bit of literature, I got somewhat distracted by the frequency with which the octopus is compared to an alien. This is a very short list of cases, starting from metric analysis 61. The octopus is like if the octopus were from Mars. Martin J. Wells famously in 1978, the octopus is an alien, although with a number of specifications. Clifton Ramsey, we start quoting actually Wells, our study, in an interview on the octopus genome. Our study describes the sequence genome from an alien, and this was, it's quite fun because it was taken very seriously by all the titles of British and American newspapers, which came out with the titles. Scientists discover that the octopus is an alien, to which one British biochemist, declared, actually responded seriously, no, it's not true, because it has mitochondria, so as long as it has mitochondria, it doesn't matter how many genes, how much the genes are different, it is still from this earth, so this matter is settled. And he said very recently, but the one that really caught my attention in some way, made me a bit uneasy, is the last one by Peter Godfrey Smith, 2016, which was circulated by Liuta for preparing our next session. And it is, if we can make contact with cephalopod sentient beings, it is not because of a shared history, not because of kinship, but because evolution built minds twice over, and this is probably the closest we will come to meeting an intelligent alien. And, you know, on the one hand, this is very much sort of a professor kind of assessment of our relation with aliens, because, you know, it sort of has, as a prerequisite, some knowledge of evolution, some knowledge of the distances, and also it is, I find it a bit anthropocentric in this idea that it made mind twice over, just as we knew what exactly mind is all about, instead of perhaps suspecting that there is an interplay of projection between us and the animals. So this set me thinking, how can we sort of pattern this relation, this way of relating, an alternative way of relating to that of kinship. So here you have my idea of sort of the relation to kinship on your left, which implies common evolutionary history, genomics, proximity, and shared physical and physiological characteristics. And you will appreciate how these sort of features are really difficult to disentangle from one another. They're sort of faces of the same three-faced coin, if I may. And at this level, I'm very ready to acknowledge that cephalopods are truly alien to us. From a different point of view, which I call of acquaintance, which is characterized by a long history of coexistence, relations of use, and spaces of encounter, we can say that to many a human culture and to many a human community, so at a lower, more localized level, we should see, actually cephalopods are definitely familiar instead. So now I will go, just for the sake of analysis, to give you an idea of what I mean by these three elements, although, like I said, they are not really separable from one another. And one other thing I want to point out is that I do not by any means intend these two ways of relating as mutually exclusive or even as sort of in competition with one another, but rather as two extremes of a gradient or a field of tension, in a sense. So, coexistence. On your left, you can see a few reports which were taken from the bibliography of the wonderful Nick Henry 1875, The Devil Fisher Fiction and a Fact, and they relate to the introduction of the very first octopus at the Brighton Aquarium in 1874, which was a tremendous success. People queued to look at this animal. He had poetry dedicated to him. It was sincerely more than that. And I think think this is Punch, or I can't remember, but this journal gave also the news that we fancy we can hear the reader shudder when he learns that it can actually be sold for food. On the other hand, this one small guy here from the coast of Calabria seems to know very well that the octopus can be an excellent food. And we can speculate, although we don't know that for sure, that he has learned that from his father, just following him. Perhaps he has learned, or he will learn shortly to go hunting cephalopods. And although this doesn't mean to imply that his way of relating to cephalopods is any better than the other, it is surely very different, and it is sort of a way of relating to the animal that doesn't go through neither surprise nor distance. Relations of use. Famously, we all know that Packard in, I think, 1972 declared that cephalopods physiologically are fish. A few days ago, Dr. Ferito made me aware, and it's something that's actually popped out several times during this day, that cephalopods also merciologically are fish. They are sold together, and in Italy as well as in Greece, when you say you're having a fish dinner, this includes bivalve and cephalopods without need to make any difference. So they are merciologically similar in the sense that they are food. They are corpora vilia, as it is to say, things that can be sold, although vilis doesn't necessarily mean cheap. As far as spaces of encounter are concerned, here, we have two levels. One is geography, of course. The cephalopods of the Mediterranean, the ones we can get in the Mediterranean, are different. We have more littoral species, and also we have these sort of in-between spaces like the tidal space or the surfaces on the rocks, which sort of provides a neutral area where it is actually possible to make the acquaintance with these animals in a place that's not their place, not even our place exactly. And whereas in the sort of kind of representation that answers for that is, for instance, like the one in the Pompeii mosaic that was shown yesterday by John Battista, of the octopus steering apart the lobster, whereas a representation stemming more from the sort of Viking culture and northern mythology shows a comparable cephalopod, slightly bigger, tearing apart a ship. So, and here we get to combine now spaces and use, we get to sort of make it more difficult, and consider the special spaces of encounter, which is something that has a historical beginning. There were aquaria and zoological and marine stations, which only started around the mid of the 19th century, and which had a double effect. On the one hand, the difference in the environment, in the two environments we occupy, was made as conspicuous as possible through the glass wall of the aquarium, so that the distance was maximized. On the other side, the fact of having them available for show for long periods of time was actually an inspiration for curious theorists, but also for the first comparative psychologists, in whose this is one abstract from Animal Intelligence by George Romanes, but there are other examples. And in these early sort of catalogues of animal intelligence throughout the animal kingdom, cephalopods feature quite, not quite centrally, but surprisingly quite well. Although, once again, these same places can be put to other uses by different communities. And here we have, in a sense, the three elements put together, because it was not only comparative, or not even mainly comparative psychologists who actually used the zoological station. Between the end of the 19th century and World War II, it was physiologists, medical researchers, and to a certain extent zoologists who, to took advantage of these facilities, and the way they framed this animal was pretty much different than the comparative psychologists, because its value of use was different. It was used either as a comparative model or as an ersatz for studies in regeneration, degeneration, blood physiology, hormones, and the rest. And it was simply used as material and as a simple model for comparing to more complex vertebrates. In 1928, Georg Grimpe famously stated that whoever has had the chance of working in a zoological station such as Naples will immediately understand why these animals are called the guinea pigs of the sea. And Naples here has a special value because one thing I forgot to say before, that one other distance, one other differentiation that was imposed by zoological station, and that was particularly conspicuous at Naples, was the division of the expertise between the catchers, the caretakers, and the scientists. In Naples you had this sort of legally enforced membrane that was the conservation room, which was forbidden to scientists. They only got the material to work on, and the rest was assigned to different groups, so the kind of different elements of wisdom were dispersed among different communities. And it is not by chance, perhaps, well, it is by chance, but it is meaningful that J. Young, who is the one who started the first sort of large, massive research program on the octopus as a model, learned the job and was introduced to cephalopods by a medical doctor, Enrico Sereni, in his first day at the station in the 20s. And the way J. Young, who was a zoologist and not a stupid one, if I may, nevertheless, the way he conceived and he framed the octopus during this whole 40 years long research project was somewhat peculiar. It was not, in principle it had to be started as part of a comparative project on learning, but what it became really was a simple model for the study of the circuits that define learning and memory, possibly to be extended to the study of humans. And even more so, not only was the octopus useful as a simple model, so as a sort of escape from the complexities of the vertebrate brain, but also, and very importantly, as a rhetoric element. In fact, in his Reed lectures in 1951, J. Young declared, "We do not find it easy suddenly to change our ways of speaking about ourselves, but to speak of the memory of the octopus is already so absurd, almost laughable, that it is hardly a more unnatural step to compare it with the memory of a machine." 2 minutes? Oh my goodness, okay. So, what J. Young, in his sort of way of relating to, sort of presenting the octopus as a simple model through what Karen Rudders called the laundry list kind of thing. So, resistant to the insults of surgery, excellent to keep in captivity, good learner, voracious and everything, was the effort that he and his group had put in simplifying the animal, that is to say, finding a very simple training situation in which attack and withdrawal were the basic reactions, simplifying to the limit the kind of circuitry that was supposed to be responsible for this learning, and finally getting this animal so well streamlined as to be finally mechanizable. What you see on the right is an octopus simulator of the eye and a part of the octopus. So what these people did not expect is that through their efforts, combined with their sort of extra scientific efforts at advertising the octopus as a model, so they had the split between the scientific work where the octopus is simple and a good model for studying, and this extra work where all the sort of mythology was brushed in. And it had a weird effect which I'm sure went beyond their original intentions, that is to say, to spark the curiosity about the capacity of these animals to feel pain. So on the one hand you have this wonderful animal. The kind of experimental setup they used was based on delivering shock, so you had some sort of connection between the memory of the shock and the learning, so people made the connection, and the result was, in the late 70s, the start of this parliamentary initiative to have all cephalopods included in the animal scientific procedures, which was ended only in 1993 with the inclusion of the octopus only. Now, in a different occasion, I have sort of compared this process to a process of a canonization, in a sense. You have the order sanctitatis, the fame of sanctity, which is sort of spread through the public. Then everything is brought in front of the devil's advocate, or the devilfish advocate, as my wife likes to say. And, you know, they weigh the pros and cons, you know, what it has not, and at the end of the day, they decide, squid and cuttlefish out, but you, octopus, you've done enough miracles, and they are tested, you can pass, and you are protected. And in the British case, the funny thing is that the ontological promotion to vertebrate was the only result, because there were no experiments at the time, and I think no experiments were reported afterwards that included the octopus. So it was really sort of a philosophical move, in a sense. More or less the same pattern can be seen, although the literature is sort of updated, but can be seen in the case of the European Directive 2063, where you have this pressure group, that I think Advocates for Animals, presenting this case of cephalopods and decapod crustaceans. Decapod crustaceans are dropped along the way, and finally we get this directive which includes the cephalopods, stating that there is enough scientific evidence that their capacity to suffer, so they are once again canonized and converted, taken within the same coverage as the vertebrates. Now, I won't go into detail here because it's been discussed, and I'm sure it will be discussed a lot between yesterday and this evening. I only want to point out a few things that perhaps, few obvious things that perhaps need to be restated. A law is like a natural event. It is neither the necessary end of a process of accumulation of knowledge, nor necessarily states, it has necessarily to do with ethics or humane treatment. A law is something that in this case composes competing interests and states a rule. So where does the ethical relation take place? And this is extremely important, and it is a word that's come over and again in these days at the level of the communities. Now, we have sort of this is a classic example of the Naples community drawn by Martin J. Wells. Communities, of course, work in a bit in a different way. The level of this sort of the society of making the animal political is: you were an alien, you passed the test, now you can be protected, you can be part of the polis. In the community, the animal has always been there. There is a constant, especially in these small communities, interested mostly in the animal. The contact is every day and it's direct, and the sort of level of interaction, of ethical interaction, is very much different, even when suffering is concerned. And I would like to finish to express this in the words that are much better than mine of Donna J. Haraway. It's not about just extending the commandment, you should not kill. The problem is not to figure out to whom this commandment applies so that other killing can just go on as usual. The problem is to learn to live responsibly within the multiplicitous necessities and labor of killing and hurting, has to be in the open, in the quest for the capacity to respond in relentless historical, non-teleological and multi-species contingency. But perhaps the commandment should be, thou shalt not make killable. And if this is not enough for you, please remind that we don't know what comes after. So with this I leave you to think. Thank you very much.